The Brutal Blade of Lorcan by Zzarchov Kowolski. Part 1. Lorcan cleft the skull of the panicked stallion as the mud began to reach its bottom jaw. A useful beast lost to this damn wizard's schemings, he bellowed in anger. It was better to die quickly with a blow to the head than to slowly suffocate in mud, but it angered the barbarian to slay such a rare beast that had served him well since he took it from its former master. The dismal gray of the swamp stretched out in all directions, and the sun was getting low. He would not live to feel dawn's rays upon him if he did not slay the necromancer who cursed him, but he could not reach his crumbling tower in time by foot. Undaunted, he stood tall in the mud, grasping the dead trunk of a nearby tree for balance as he inhaled deeply the foul odors of the swamp. Lorcan was wild and free. His senses were undulled by the soft living of civilization, and his nostrils could detect the faint smell of fire, dung, and human sweat. There were people nearby, and they likely had a skiff he could take. His great leaps hurled him from grassy hillock to grassy hillock, repeatedly sinking deep into the mud, grasping at nearby logs, and straining his iron-thewed arms to pry himself free of that all-enveloping mud. In the red glow of dusk, he reached a trio of crumbling huts, connected by a rotting boardwalk, and his nostrils reeled at the pungent stench of dead fish and acrid smoke that filled the area. Lorcan stalked the outskirts of the hamlet like a wolf circling a lost lamb. One of the huts was clearly a smokehouse. The other two showed signs of habitation, but there was no sign of raft or skiff. Lorcan was about to move closer to the huts when he saw a pair of giant forms approaching through the fog, and paused to slowly draw his blade. As they approached, Lorcan could see they were not giants, but mere men striding upon stilts. They were hunched over, carrying writhing satchels, no doubt full of fish, eels, and frogs. One carried a flickering lantern, the other a net upon a long pole. They took great strides towards one of the huts, which Lorcan could now see had a solid wooden roof rather than the molding thatch of the other two. Lorcan strode into the swamp folk's view, brazenly carrying his sword unsheathed. "I seek the necromancer, you mangy curs, and you shall help me reach him." "The necromancer is no friend of ours, noble warrior," responded the lantern-bearer. "His minions have taken almost everything from us, and defiled the graves of our ancestors for his obscene works. Have you come from the king to deliver us from his evil?" "Ha!" cried the barbarian. "If you seek deliverance, you should deliver yourselves instead of cowering and waiting for some far-off government to rescue you like lost children." "Then why do you seek such a terrible foe, whose dread sorcery can bind your very soul?" asked the lantern-bearer. "It is he who dared rouse my wrath," said Lorcan with a steely gaze. "I had come to the river town seeking work as a mercenary, but the Baron's rebellion had already been crushed before I arrived. I was at the roadside inn when the wench in my chamber screamed, for she had uncovered a fetish bag placed under my bed. I was told it is a curse set forth upon me by the necromancer of the swamp due to his infatuation with the woman I bedded, and that I would be dead by the next morning." "Ignoring the difficulty in slaying a wizard, their curses are well known to extend past their mortal coil," cautioned the lantern-bearer. "We have little ale, but will share what we have, if you wish to spend your final hours in our company." Lorcan sneered at them. "I am no cowering man of your civilized realms. I am a man of the Boilerian race, and we do not die simpering, but with steel in our hand. Now hand me your stilts, that I may end this necromancer, or die impeding me, and I will take them from your corpse." The lantern-bearer spoke. "We seek no quarrel with you, and are no friends of the necromancer. I bid you well on your task, and in addition to what you seek, I offer you what knowledge we have of the swamp as well. Night is falling soon. Will-o'-wisps will dance upon the mires. They are spirits in the necromancer's power, and hold strange power over the minds of all who traverse the swamp. To chase them is to lose your way without fail, but we who remain have learned their tricks. No matter what you seek, you must always move away from their light to reach it. When you spot the tower itself, be wary, for he has brought forth dead warriors of eons past who hide in the water and guard the base of the tower. Good hunting, Boilerian. May you live to see sunrise yet." Part 2. Lorcan moved through the swamp with great loping strides upon his stilts. They were a difficult tool to master, but his cat-like reflexes more than compensated for his lack of experience in their use. The sun had set, and he had only the dim light of the moon to navigate the forsaken mire about him at a treacherous speed. The flicker of flames appeared at the edge of Lorcan's vision, and his pulse raced. "I must be nearing the tower." He lurched forward with renewed vigor, but the lights seemed to drift further into the swamp. A primal sense of danger welled up inside Lorcan, and his memory lingered on ancient barbarian superstitions. "By Zine," he growled, "these are ghost lights seeking to lead me to my death." Lorcan quickly thought for a solution, and grinned with his own sense of cleverness. "If they seek to make me lose my way, then I need only go in whichever direction they are not." Lorcan was quite sure he had come up with this solution on his own, as he hadn't really been paying attention to the babblings of the swamp folk. The will-o'-wisps darted about the edges of Lorcan's peripheral vision in a winding serpentine pattern like a viper stalking its prey. Lorcan moved faster now, juking left and right to avoid letting the spirits get in front of him. Sweat beaded on the Boilerian's brow as he furiously levered the stilts onward, and kept his keen senses trained on the trailing lights, to the point he nearly missed the looming threat ahead of him. At the last moment he raised one stilt to spin around on the other, and in doing so narrowly avoided the arc of a thrown spear with a rusted iron tip. Ahead of him, the faint outline of a tower began to emerge from the thick fog, while a dozen ambulatory bog mummies began to crawl out of the muck and onto the many small grassy hillocks dotting the immediate area. They clutched decrepit spears and javelins of rusted iron, and despite their withered appearance, began forming a skirmish line. Lorcan gritted his teeth and lurched forward with a sudden jerking motion. His left stilt swung wide, the wood bent with the speed of the movement, finally snapping back as it connected with the skull of the nearest bog mummy, crushing it instantly. This movement caused Lorcan to begin falling forward, and a trio of spears zipped past him towards where he had been but a split second before. As Lorcan began toppling on his unsteady left stilt, he pulled up his right stilt into his hands, balancing precariously on one leg before leaping free. He used this stilt as an aerial lance and planted it squarely into the collarbone of his second bog mummy, bowling it over and pinning it to the ground while the barbarian dangled in the air. More spears flew at Lorcan as he grabbed the shaft between his feet and pulled down on the lone stilt as an archer draws back a bow, the wood straining with tension like the muscles of a panther preparing to leap. Lorcan released his feet as a spear grazed his muscular thigh, launching him airborne at the tower's roof, which he impacted with a heavy thud, sending slate tiles tumbling into the water below as he began sliding off towards the edge. With a roar worthy of a dying tiger's last rush, he drew his blade and stabbed it into the edge of the crumbling roof and swung over the edge, feet first, into one of the tower's windows with a loud crash as bits of wooden shutters flew into the room, knocking over a myriad of glassware as the barbarian landed in a crouch with his eyes locked on the very necromancer he sought. The room reeked of rot and embalming fluid. The space was open, the walls lined with workbenches and shelves, filled with arcane implements. The purple-robed, goateed necromancer was hunched over a large table, covered with a white sheet that concealed some hideous experiment that seemed to writhe in the flickering flames of the single coal brazier, which was the only source of illumination. Immediately, the air was filled with a pitiable screech as the necromancer's assistant, a disfigured wretch of a man to Lorcan's eyes, fell backwards and began to crawl away in terror. The necromancer barely had time to call out, "Adam, help!" before the barbarian was upon him, hoisting him in the air by his throat to prevent the utterances of arcane charms. "Your wretched servant cannot stop me, sorcerer," growled Lorcan. "You may have doomed me with your hexes, but I shall personally escort you to hell." The wizard seemed confused rather than terrified, and Lorcan spotted the movement out of the corner of his eye too late. A hulking figure lurched from under the sheet and grasped Lorcan by the wrist and face. Its massive fingers smelled of charred flesh and blocked Lorcan's vision. Lorcan strained his mighty thews with the fury of a dying animal as this hulking brute attempted to force the barbarian to release the necromancer or have his arm ripped from his body. The power of this beast would have killed any normal man already, and in the seconds that seemed like hours, Lorcan could feel his sinews reaching the limits of their endurance, and knew they would soon tear. When with a sudden crash, Lorcan was abruptly released as a loud howl erupted from the brute. The necromancer's servant had kicked over the brazier and spilled hot coals over the monster, which was quickly becoming fully engulfed in flame and staggering towards the window Lorcan had burst through. "Die, fiend!" Lorcan spat, as he quickly swung the necromancer sideways, cracking the top of his head open on the edge of the solid oak table the monster had just risen from. Brains and skull fragments scattered across its surface before Lorcan casually tossed the necromancer's body upon the burning coals now strewn over the floor. "Spare me, O great warrior," begged the wretch as Lorcan trained his steely gaze upon him and stepped forward. "I was but a slave under his terrible powers." "Then rejoice in the ability to die a free man, Adam," said Lorcan coldly. for you aided his schemes against me nonetheless." Adam cowered backwards. "Wait, wait, I can aid you. I know the Master's plan for you, and how to stop it." Lorcan paused. "Speak, wretch, and speak true, or your death shall become far more terrible than before." "The Master had you hexed, that your life force would be poisoned, and he had made a cure at great cost," said Adam. "Why would he make a cure? Did he seek to bargain with me? He made no demands, nor offered any so-called cure," asked Lorcan with a growing skepticism. Adam paused a second in hesitation before continuing. "You were but a tool to him. He sought to gain dominion over the ancient demonist of Fire Mountain, who exists by absorbing the life force of powerful warriors. That woman was a succubus, and his thrall, and has stolen many years of your life. It is he who has sent word of the cure." Lorcan bristled with anger. "Blast these wizards and their damnable schemes! Show me the cure, and I shall drink it while the conjurer chokes on his own theft." "It is no brew, but a charm you must wear for a full month. This is a slow poison designed to force the obedience of its victim, and he will send all his demons to hunt for it," said Adam. "Zine! Is there no end to this maddening sorcery?" shouted Lorcan. "You could slay the demon conjurer, and maybe regain your stolen years in his death. I know the secret path to his hidden cavern of power, for I was often sent as messenger," offered Adam. "Then perhaps you shall live. Show me the amulet, and then," said the barbarian with a laugh, "we shall first see how you handle climbing on the roof to fetch my blade. Survive that, and you may yet live another day." Part 3. Lorcan left the swamp and headed into the foothills, driving the cringing Adam before him, and binding his hands in tethers at night. Lorcan found the wretch not only ugly of body, but weak of will, and soaked in the feeble ideologies of civilized peoples who are ignorant of nature and its primal truth that is red of tooth and claw. Lorcan laughed heartily at the fear of both his physical presence and his views inspired in the weakling. For 3 days they traveled through the hills until Adam suddenly stopped and pointed over the next hill at a low col surrounded by jagged cliffs. "There is the route we must take. Just over the saddle you will find a small cavern on your left that will lead you straight to his ritual chambers." Lorcan kicked Adam in the rump and forced him to stagger forward. "Move, cur! I'll not trust your word alone. You shall lead me all the way to the conjurer himself." Adam scowled and staggered forward down the hill. Lorcan broke off a handful of fresh pine branches as he went, dipping their sap-coated ends in the layer of dried needles they walked upon. It was another 3 hours of hard marching up the next hill before the pair reached the entrance to the cave. Lorcan dropped his collection of sticks onto the rocky ground and beckoned Adam towards him. "If you think your mongrel legs will carry you faster scared than the iron limbs of my race in my anger, it will be your final mistake. Even in the maze of the cave I can track you with ease by smell alone." Lorcan took a piece of flint and steel from his pouch and began starting a small fire on the pine needle-coated branches. Carefully he nursed this into a low smoldering flame and then bound the branches together with the very leather straps he used to bind Adam at night. Picking up the makeshift torch, he roughly shoved Adam deeper into the cave before drawing his blade and following. The cave was initially damp and showed signs of past bear habitation, much as one would expect, but after traveling a dozen cramped and claustrophobic feet, Lorcan began to suspect Adam was telling the truth. The passage became more spacious, the ground more or less level, and signs of tracks being intentionally obscured with brooms were all obvious to Lorcan's keen barbarian senses. In the distance, Lorcan heard the low drone of monotonous chanting, and the faint scent of brimstone lingered in the air. Lorcan passed his torch to Adam and shoved him forward. "When we enter the chamber, act as if you were an emissary with word from your master, while I move upon him unseen." "He is furious with the schemes of my master," sputtered Adam. "Then pray to what inferior gods you weaklings appease, that the conjurer is not one to shoot the messenger," retorted Lorcan with a grim glower. Adam clutched his cloak about him and moved forward, brandishing the torch. Lorcan slunk low and followed several steps behind him. The flickering lights of a great fire began to fill the tunnel with strange shadows, and Lorcan knew they were close. The chanting was steady, and Lorcan could also make out the sound of another person moving about with heavy footfalls. Lorcan picked up a small stone from the cave floor and continued on. Adam entered first into the large chamber ahead. Hiding back in the shadows, Lorcan saw a great rift split it in two, with only a single rope bridge spanning it. On the other side, a fire pit burned brightly at the feet of a massive onyx idol, 3 stories tall, causing deep shadows to dance upon the demonic features of its face with malign intent. A robed figure in a horned helm chanted while facing the idol with his back to Lorcan, all the while lethargically waving his ceremonial whip and crook about his body. The walls were coated in strange glyphs and sigils, being delicately painted by a great hairy ape. When the barbarian glanced back to Adam, he saw that the wretch had moved with surprising speed and deftness toward the bridge and was still unnoticed by the sorcerer. Lorcan rapped the wall of the cave with his sword, and Adam froze in his tracks. The wizard ceased his chanting and whirled around, immediately locking eyes on Adam. "Who dares disturb Sedinaban, binder of demons and master of Fire Mountain?" Adam turned to flee, but with a gesture his torch exploded in a shower of sparks and splinters, throwing Adam to the ground what seemed an inordinate distance given the force of the blast. "Did you think you could escape so easily, thief? How is it you found my place of power?" boomed Sedinaban as he began to stride across the bridge, which rocked with each of his slow and deliberate footfalls. Lorcan threw his stone with the expertise of a savage hunter at the great idol, striking it squarely with a loud clang. The demoness turned his gaze for but a second, and in that time Lorcan was almost upon him, having leapt from the shadows with the power and force of a lion moving in for the kill and a roar to match. As Lorcan sprinted down the rickety bridge over the seemingly bottomless chasm, Sedinaban barely had time to begin staggering backwards and hold aloft his crook, now effervescing with dark smoke. Lorcan's first blow struck the smoke, rebounding off as if it had struck solid stone. Undeterred, he swung low at the wizard's ankles and splintered one of the bridge's floorboards when Sedinaban hastily jumped backwards. Sedinaban whispered in strange tongues, and his whip began to writhe on its own and glow a sickly purple hue when a sudden panic filled his face and the floor fell out from under them. Sedinaban fell backwards and was able to land mostly on solid ground, quickly scrambling to his feet despite losing his crook and whip to the chasm. Lorcan, however, was left holding the one remaining rope support of the bridge with a single arm, precariously dangling over the abyss below. "Adam, you worthless mongrel!" he cried as he hurled his sword at his former prisoner, busily cutting the second rope with a dagger he somehow concealed on his person all of this time. Lorcan's blade struck Adam in the groin with a resounding thunk and toppled the figure over. Lorcan began frantically moving hand over hand towards solid ground, but within an instant the figure of Sedinaban quickly sneered at him from the ledge and drew an athame from his robes. "It seems that I shall make an unexpected offering to the lords of the abyss of a stench-ridden savage," sneered the wizard as he began slicing the remaining rope. "Thago, you useless brute, fetch my—" Sedinaban did not have time to finish his sentence before a heavy chair crashed into his back, splintering both into a dozen pieces, which then fell into the chasm and out of view. The sight of the ape slaying its master gave Lorcan no pause. He merely used the distraction to quickly reach the edge and roll onto solid ground before leaping to his feet with the grace of a wildcat. Before him stood a towering ape-like figure, at least 10 feet in height, the fire burning behind it, draping Lorcan in its shadow. "Go," it croaked in a deep and booming voice, dismissively waving its hand and turning its back on Lorcan. But his blood was up, and he would not be so easily dismissed like a dancing girl that bored her master. Lorcan took his scabbard in his hands and leaped onto the back of the creature and began strangling it. The creature fell to its knees and flailed its arms about in a futile manner, trying to dislodge the barbarian that was slowly crushing its windpipe with his leather scabbard. Lorcan grinned maniacally as he dug one heel in the creature's lower back and strained forward with his other leg against the cold, hard ground to gain more leverage. The seconds passed, and Lorcan saw the beast's eyes rolling back into its head when he felt a sudden sharp pain. Time seemed to stand still for Lorcan, as sweat almost instantaneously appeared on his brow. The sharp and unmistakable feel of cold steel plunging into his flesh, a deep stab straight into his perineum. Thoughts and plans raced through his mind in that instant, but the instant was over, and the blade jerked 90 degrees and was brought down in a slashing movement across the Achilles tendon of the one foot he had placed on the ground. More pain shot through his body as his muscle rolled up like a window blind, while blood sprayed from his loins. He collapsed to the ground, howling in indignant rage. There behind him stood the wretched hunchback figure of Adam, his hands soaked in Lorcan's blood. Lorcan had no time to react before the now freed ape grabbed him by the ankle and threw him into the chasm. The ape and Adam stared at each other in uneasy silence for several seconds before Adam reached into the front of his pants and threw a small but thick tome with a large puncture mark on the ground with a dull thud, and spoke, "Your master is dead. and the secrets of the necromancer are yours. I have fulfilled my end of the bargain." "The warrior? Who was he?" "He called you Adam," spoke the ape slowly. "A tool. We tricked him into thinking the wizards had cursed him that he would draw their ire," responded Abraham. "And I've no clue why he called me Adam. He never actually asked my name. He was a foul-tempered lout." "He seemed excited," said Thago the ape-man, pausing to make rude hand gestures, "when strangling." "He was dung in human form," said Abraham. "I had to hear his so-called opinions on deformities, social policy, and different races all the way here. Why does a barbarian even care about taxes?" Thago winced in disgust. Abraham spoke again. "Now, for your end of the bargain. Lead us to the ruins of Zaldergand."